Hi, I'm Scott. Welcome to Goldwing Docs. It's springtime, time to get out and go riding, but the first start of the year does more damage to your engine than any other time of the year. Let me explain why and how to prevent it coming up next. Oil is your engine's lifeblood. There are metal pieces, particularly your crank bearings, that are just two smooth pieces of metal that slide against one another, and they rely on a tiny, microscopic thin layer of oil to create lubrication. Without that oil, you basically have two pieces of metal scraping against one another and wearing each other away. Obviously, running your engine without oil in it is a quick way to destroy it. Those two pieces of metal get very hot, your engine seizes, and now you have a very expensive big paperweight. That crank bearing has to endure a tremendous amount of force because when the spark plug lights off the fuel air charge and it shoves that piston down, all that motion, that pressure is being changed from linear motion into rotational motion by the bearings of that crank. So you have it coming down and it's cranking it around, and a huge amount of pressure is being exerted on those two smooth bearings, and only that tiny thin layer of oil is protecting them. So what's the problem with starting in spring? Well, your bike has spent all winter long with oil slowly dripping down into the sump. So all the oil that was in the galleys, that was stuck in the oil pump, that was basically everywhere out throughout the engine, most of it is now sitting in the sump in the bottom, and it's not lubricating the engine. So if you just get on your bike, start it, and go, for the first 5-10 seconds, your engine is running with no oil, no lubrication, and that's when an incredible amount of wear is occurring in the engine because it's actually running. You have pistons pushing down and pushing those smooth bearings against each other and causing that wear before the oil actually gets pumped up there by the oil pumps to create that lubricating layer. In very high tolerance or high performance engines, you see this on very expensive engines like airplanes or in racing cars. They have what's called a pre-oiler. And what that is a separate electric pump that pumps the oil through the engine before the engine starts. That way, when the engine starts, because it has such high tolerances, the oil is already there and you don't get the wear that it would occur otherwise. We have no such luxury on the motorcycle, so we have to do the next best thing. So obviously we want to pump oil, but don't we have to start it in order for it to pump oil? Not quite. So we want to crank the engine because that will crank the oil pumps, which will pump the oil. But doesn't that mean we're going to start the engine? Not necessarily. So for the first time that we're starting it in the springtime, we can crank the engine, but without actually starting the engine. That means we aren't having the combustion and the combustion pressures and the pistons shoving those cylinders, the pistons in the cylinder down, and we don't have those incredible pressures occurring on the smooth bearings of the crank. So there is going to be some friction and some wear because we still don't have the oil there, but it's nowhere near the incredible amount of wear that occurs when the engine is actually running. So how do we crank it without actually starting it? Well, there's a few different ways. The easiest way on the carbureted bikes like this 1500 and some of the four-cylinder bikes is simply make sure you don't open the choke. So if the choke is closed, the bike's not going to start. You can also have the fuel shut off if the bike has a manual petcock. Turn off the fuel petcock, leave the choke wide open. The bike is not going to start, it's just going to crank. I do recommend you do, if you can turn off the gas, turn it off so you don't actually introduce gasoline into the cylinders and then accidentally gas wash the cylinders with gasoline, which is going to remove the oil lubrication. That said, the carbureted bikes, because they've sat all winter, the float bowls of the carburetors are going to be empty. So there's not going to be a lot of fuel there or any fuel to actually go into the engine anyway. So we should be all right. What about the fuel injected engines? Well, that's even easier. Now, some of the bikes you can actually turn the kill switch off and it will crank without starting. Not all bikes will do that. This is one that won't. For the fuel injected bikes, it's even easier. All you have to do is take the throttle, crank it all the way open before you hit the start button. As long as you hold that open, the ECU, the computer that controls the fuel injection, will not allow the engine to start. It will just crank and get the oil pumped around. So let's demonstrate how we go about doing that. I'm going to turn the ignition on, make sure that the choke is not engaged, and I'm just going to crank the engine. You'll notice that as you do that, as you crank the engine, the low oil warning light will go out. That means we've got oil pressure. It's flowing around. So 5 or 10 seconds of cranking is all you need. And once you've done that, adjust your choke, start the bike up normally. You're good to go. Now, there is one other thing I want to talk to you about this, and that is those people who insist that they need to start their bike all winter long. Please don't do that. It does not help your bike. It does not exercise the bike. It does not keep it lubricated. It does the opposite. Every time you start your bike over the winter just to exercise it or whatever, it's actually creating incredible wear because you're doing that non-oil wear on your engine every time you do it. It's so bad for your bike. Don't do it. Put your bike on a battery tender. I'll put a link to it in the description below. It will keep your battery in tip-top shape all winter long. Change the oil before you put it away for the season. That makes sure that none of the acids or water or condensation are in the crankcase eating away the inside of your engine. When springtime comes, do exactly what I just did there. Start the engine up, go riding. Well, I hope that helps you know what to do starting your bike up for the new riding season. If you like what you saw, please click like, subscribe, click that little bell. It really helps us out when you do that. Plus, you get notified every time I post one of these fantastic videos. Thanks for watching.